Well, I've done it again. Welcome back to Retro Bits. As always, I'm your host, Matt D'Amico, and today we're going to take a look at what's inside this box. I recently imported this from a Japanese auction using a proxy bidding and shipping service. I've done an entire episode on how that process works, so check that out if you're interested in the details. Now, I told myself I wasn't going to do any more unboxing or thrifting type videos because they don't really perform that well, but I've had this thing sitting out there in the front hall for over a month and I couldn't decide, should I just open it or should I make a video about it? And I figure what's inside is interesting and fun enough that it does deserve to be on a video. I also have a bunch of donations and other items that I bought for really good deals, and I thought, I could just bundle them all together and that would be today's episode. So, without further ado, let's get to the unboxing. All right, here we go. And once again, I've used the auction consolidation service, so there are multiple items consolidated into this single box in order to save on shipping. Shipping is one of the most expensive costs of this entire endeavor. All right, let's see what we got here. Bubble wrap, we've got bubble wrap here. All right, everything seems to be in this one. There we go. All right. So we'll take a look at what's in this green envelope a bit later, and another green envelope. And first of all, we've got one of these. We'll start by taking a look at that. But before we do, here's the original auction page. This item was sold as junk, which is the Japanese way of saying that it's untested and comes with no guarantee. I have noticed that they do tend to underrepresent the condition of items, maybe so you don't leave negative feedback or try to return it later. That aside, it looks to be complete in the original box and in good condition. I won the auction uncontested for an opening bid of just under $30 US, which I think is more than fair for this important piece of gaming history. Hopefully it'll work, but I don't mind taking a risk because they're not difficult to repair. So let's see what that $30 gets us. Now what we have here is the Nintendo Family Computer, or Famicom as it's more affectionately known, and it's in its original box, and the box appears to be in relatively good condition. One interesting thing is that there is no cardboard backing, it is just styrofoam, so it's just a box top on top of a styrofoam cover. All right, we've got the original manual. It looks like it's never been opened. It's still in its protective pouch. Interesting. Okay, I'm not sure what this is for, but this is clearly the manual. Yep. And then we've got the system itself. Let me take this out and take a look at it. The Famicom was launched in 1983 in Japan, a full 2 years before we got the Nintendo Entertainment System in North America, and by 1984 this had already become a best-selling system. Now this is in pretty nice condition. It's not totally white like it used to be originally, but it hasn't yellowed all that badly compared to some. One thing that strikes me right away is actually how small this system is. It's very kind of hard to put that across on a camera, but let me get something that we can compare it to size-wise. Yeah, so here's my mobile phone, you know, standard size phone, and yeah, it's actually a lot smaller than, you know, you would think. Now, the Famicom was Nintendo's answer to the ColecoVision. They wanted to model it after that and make something that was more powerful. And the launch titles of this system included Donkey Kong, Donkey Kong Jr., and Popeye, which of course are pretty simple games compared to what we would see later on this system. The controllers, of course, are connected to the base of the system and they're hardwired in, they can't be removed. And that was done for cost reduction purposes. You can see cost reduction throughout the system just by the fact that the cardboard box was only open on the back end and the short leads that they give you. So you can't sit very far away from your television. The controllers don't have the reach of the Nintendo controllers that we got here in North America. And speaking of the NES, just check out the size difference between the Famicom and the NES. The NES is much, much larger, even if you account for the embedded controllers here. Obviously, they've redesigned the machine. This one has a top-loading design with a little dust cover. The NES has a front-loading design, which was intended to mimic that of a VCR. Nintendo wanted to separate themselves from the game consoles of their contemporaries during a time at the end of the great video game crash of the mid to early 80s. So we got this design instead. Another difference is that the Famicom has an RF input only here on the back, whereas of course the NES has both RF inputs on the back as well as composite. So we're not going to be able to hook up the Famicom to a composite monitor or television. We're going to have to use something with an RF tuner and also something that can tune to the Japanese channels, not the North American channels. Otherwise, it is an NTSC device and we should be able to get a picture out of it. Now, this is a fairly standard video game console. It doesn't feature any of the interesting or novel control schemes that Nintendo was known for later on, but one thing to note is that the Player 2 controller does have the microphone built in, and there were about half a dozen games where you could interact with the game by either blowing or shouting into the microphone. It's not voice recognition or anything so advanced, but it is an interesting little addition to what is otherwise a normal game system. Something to keep in mind is that just like the NES and the Sega Genesis, the Famicom uses a center negative on the power supply, so just keep that in mind. This one is rated at 10 volts DC, but I suspect that you could get away with a standard 9-volt power brick. In terms of the literature that came with it, we have pretty much a standard manual here. It just shows how to set up the device and how to hook it up to a television. So pretty standard stuff, not too interesting. What is interesting though is this little comic that came with the system. And in it, it shows a kid at school and he's walking home from school and he's playing his Famicom and getting a high score there. And then they spill some drinks on it and they fry the Famicom. And later on, he's taken it apart, and the comic even shows the internal layout of the system, and it shows how the cartridges are assembled and all the different components of the system, and he's cleaning it out. So yeah, interesting little comic book that came along with the Famicom here. Now moving right along, let's take a look at one of the green envelopes because I think I know what's in this. So let's just pop that open and pour out the contents. Yep, there we go. So this was a separate auction from the Famicom, but what good is a game system without some games to play in it, right? Like the system itself, loose games are also a bargain. Instead of bidding on one of the huge lots of cartridges, I opted for a small selection of titles I actually wanted, for a buy-it-now price of just over $14. Here in the US, a single one of these games can cost as much as $25 in loose condition on eBay. As a bonus, they've also been tested and confirmed to work, which is nice. Alright, so here's what we've got for cartridges. First of all, no Nintendo system is complete without a copy of Super Mario Bros., the original, the game that started it all. And then we've got Super Mario USA. Now, if you check this out, it is what we got here in the US as Super Mario 2, a reskinned Doki Doki Panic. In Japan, of course, they got a different Super Mario 2 game that was deemed to be too difficult for the US audience, so we got a different game entirely, and then it was resold in Japan as Super Mario USA. And then maybe one of the best games on the entire system, Super Mario Bros. 3. So there we go, some of the classic titles to go along with the Famicom, and for $15, not too bad. So the cartridges appear to be in pretty good shape. They're a lot smaller than the NES cartridges that we got here, and they use a 60-pin connector instead of the 72-pin connector that we got in North America. There's no lockout chip on the Famicom like there is on the NES. So it is possible to play these games on an NES with a converter, and vice versa. You can play NES games on a Famicom with a converter. But we just open the dust shield, we insert the cartridge like that, and then when we want to remove the cartridge, you can either just pull it out or press the little eject button there. So let's get this thing hooked up and we'll test it out with a RF monitor. Alright, I've got the Famicom hooked up to the Sony monitor, but because this doesn't have an RF tuner, I've had to also connect up a VCR. So I've got the RF output from the Famicom going into the VCR, then composite from the VCR going into the TV. Now if we turn this on, the Famicom is set to channel 2. However, channel 2 in Japanese RF is not the same as North American. We actually have to go all the way around the other end and tune it to channel 95 here on the VCR. You know, for RF, this actually looks pretty good. The sound is a little bit crunchy. There's a hiss kind of perpetually coming out of the speaker, but in general, whoops. Yeah, you know, I could modify this and get it to have composite out or even RGB, but honestly, it really doesn't look that bad, and I think I'm going to leave it original because this is kind of a collector's item for me now, and I've got an NES, I've got a Mr. FPGA if I want, you know, high-end RGB output. I think I'm going to keep this all original and just enjoy it the way it was meant to be played. RF and all. So there we go, the Nintendo Family Computer. And these things are still relatively cheap because there's a high supply and a relatively low demand. They sold almost 20 million of these things in Japan, and a lot of Japanese live in cities and don't have a lot of space to store stuff like this, so there's a lot of these on the market, both in North American eBay and on Yahoo Auctions Japan. So you should have no problem finding one of these. The reason I wanted one is because they're really right at home in any retro game collection. Nintendo was very influential, and this was the start of their dominance in the home market, so it only made sense to collect one while they were still inexpensive, easy to find, and in relatively good condition and complete. So that's what I did. Now, in addition to the Famicom, we also have one of these, and of course, you saw what was in the thumbnail, so you already know, but let's take a look at the Japanese import Nintendo 64. I've never owned one of these before and haven't played many of the games either, so I figured it was high time to pick one up. Prices in the US have been climbing higher and higher, yet they're still within the realm of reason in Japan. I won this complete box example for around $34, but it wasn't uncontested like the previous two auctions. The seller claimed that the unit was working and had been carefully stored in a smoke-free environment, so it seemed like a pretty safe bet. Let's see for ourselves, shall we? One thing we can tell right away from the noise it's making is that it also, like the Famicom, has a styrofoam back, so it doesn't have a complete box, another cost-reduced cardboard box. Let's see what we've got inside. Okay, just like the Famicom, we've got the instruction manual in a sealed package. It doesn't look like it's ever been read, and I wouldn't have read it. I would have hooked up the system and started playing right away, so no surprises there. Looks like we've got the main system body in relatively nice shape here. I'll put that aside, we'll look at it in a minute. We've got the controller here, and it does not have a memory card or a rumble pack, just the controller, but the controller looks like it's in good condition as well. And then we've got the AC adapter here. It's missing the cord that goes from the AC adapter to the N64, so we may not be able to actually use the system today. That's a bummer. All right, so the N64 looks pretty good here, right? This model came out in 1996 in Japan or 1997 in North America, and it was developed in partnership with Silicon Graphics, and I was actually working for Silicon Graphics as an intern at the time this came out in North America. And let's take a look real quick at the machine. Yeah, we're missing the cord that connects the AC adapter to the system, which is kind of a bummer. And it also didn't come with an AV cable, but I think this is a standard and I may have one from another system that'll work with this. Other defining features, we've got the expansion port here, and note we don't have an expansion, we just have the jumper pack installed here. Now I'm sure you're all shouting at your monitor by now, and you'll have to forgive me because I've never owned one of these before, but yeah, I just realized how this actually works, and you probably already know this, but you take the AC adapter and you just shove it in the back like that. So yeah, we'll hopefully be able to test this out in a minute. So yeah, sorry about that guys, I didn't realize until just now that's how it works. Okay, got another green pouch. Let's take a look at what's inside of this one, because obviously I wouldn't buy an N64 without some games, so let's have a look. While it is possible to buy a huge pile of games for next to nothing on Yahoo auctions, they're generally not all titles you'd want and often contain many duplicates. Again, I opted to purchase a curated selection of games with a buy it now price of around $11. According to PriceCharting.com, some of these titles average over $30 a piece loose on eBay. Yeah, no thanks. And here's what we've got from that separate auction. That was the fourth auction. We've got a copy of Super Mario 64. I mean, no N64 is complete without a copy of Super Mario 64. We've got Mario Tennis, Mario Kart 64, another staple on the system. I mean, you can't have the system without that game. We've got Yoshi's Story, and we've got Super Smash Bros. For the 64 here. So a good selection of games and value priced at only $11 for the whole lot. So not bad. In terms of cross-compatibility, the cartridges are basically the same as the ones that you would find in North America. The only difference is there's a little lockout feature here. There's some plastic tabs, and the Japanese cartridges slot into a Japanese N64, but a North American cartridge would get blocked on those tabs. So you can either use an adapter or modify the system to accept a North American cartridge. But otherwise, there's no other lockout to worry about. It's just that physical defeat that you have to get around. Now, the N64 was really hyped before its launch, and they sold out of all 300,000 units on the launch day. And eventually, they sold over 30 million of these things worldwide, but they were in stiff competition with the Sega Saturn and the Sony PlayStation, and the PlayStation sold over 100 million units during its run. So this thing didn't do as well as the NES/Famicom combo, but it still did acceptably well. And they are still well available here in the United States, but not at the price point that I got this one for. But we'll talk more about price in a little bit. Now, the system did not come with an AV cable, but it turns out the port on the back is the same as the one you'll find on an SNES, as well as the GameCube. And I happen to have an RGB SCART cable for my SNES, but apparently the N64 doesn't have RGB output. It only has composite and S-video. So I also have a composite cable for the SNES, so we'll just try that out and see how that works. All right, I've got the system all hooked up with composite to the Sony monitor here, and let's see what we've got.
It's me, Mario.
Hey, there we go. It's working. Nice. Oh, and look at that. We have saved games already, so the memory on the cartridge is still working, and someone has clearly played this pretty far into the game. Alright, let's look at the final cost of the 4 separate auctions and then address the elephant in the room, which, of course, is shipping. First of all, the combined sales price of all the items plus tax came out to 11,806 yen, or around 81 US dollars at a nominal exchange rate. I don't think anyone could argue the value there. To that, we need to add the cost of domestic shipping of the parcels to the proxy's warehouse, which amounted to another $25. I opted for extra protective packaging to be added when the items were consolidated into a single box, a nominal charge of $10. The real expense was the international shipping at around $82. Add it all up, and the total shipping and handling amounted to $125 at the proxy's exchange rate. Combined with the item prices, that gives us a grand total of just over $200 for the 2 consoles and 8 games. All that shipping more than doubled our cost. Does that mean it wasn't worth the trouble? Well, consider that a boxed N64 on eBay now averages almost $200, with some examples going for twice that. Sure, there are deals out there to be had without going through the hassle and expense of importing, but I don't feel like I got taken for a ride on this purchase either. Alright, what do you think? How did I do? In general, I'm super happy with the condition of the items. Everything's in great shape, and you really can't beat these prices on Yahoo Auctions. Of course, where I did eat it was on the international shipping. If I'd been patient, I might have found a better deal on an N64 on eBay, but even then, I'd end up paying $20 or $30 per item to have them shipped domestically, so it may have been a bit of a wash. Let me know in the comments, what do you think? Would you have bought this stuff on Yahoo Auctions, or would you have waited for a better deal to come along on eBay? Now, I think it's time to move on, because I want to look at some donations to the channel, as well as some really good deals that I found recently. And through the magic of YouTube time travel, here are a bunch of items that have been donated to the channel recently. Let's get a close-up on the table, and we'll look at each one individually. Alright, so first up, we've got a donation to the channel from my cousin Erik, who was cleaning out the house in anticipation of the birth of his twins, and came across some of his old handhelds from back in the day, and sent them my way. So let's take a look, first of all, at this Nintendo DS Lite. Alright, so what we have here is a silver Nintendo DS Lite, and of course it is well used. This was from his childhood, I believe, and so yeah, it's in actually operating condition because I fired it up and it powered on right away. And not only did it power on, but it has a multi-cart installed already, so it has a bunch of titles already loaded up onto this multi-cart, so that's pretty cool. A working Nintendo DS Lite with a multi-cart. Very cool. Next up, we have a Sega Game Gear, and this one came with a number of games, which is pretty cool, but this is not the unit that I recently featured on another episode where I recapped a Sega Game Gear. This is a different unit entirely. And when I received it, just like the Nintendo, it had signs of being well used and well loved by a child who grew up with the system. It had a lot of scratches all over the surface and the screen, and of course it wouldn't power on at all. It was completely dead. So what I've done with the system is I opened it up and I found inside it has a very nice VA1 board in it with no sign of capacitor damage whatsoever. So I fully recapped the system, all 3 boards, and then I used some plastic polish to try and clean up the plastic front face as well as the screen protector. What I found is that if you polish the screen protector too much, the black finish actually comes right off of it. So I ended up replacing the screen protector with a glass screen instead. So now we have a very nice, fully working, recapped Game Gear with a glass screen protector, and it's in really good shape now. It polished up really nice. I'm quite happy with this. And I mean, it was only $15 in parts, so really happy with how that turned out. So I can say that Erik's childhood Sega Game Gear is now in really good shape once again. So thank you very much for the 2 game systems, Erik. Really do appreciate it, and I will take good care of them. Alright, next up we have a PlayStation Portable, or PSP, and this was donated to the channel by Jason of Panay Collectibles. And a little bit of backstory there, Jason was opening up a new collectible shop that has retro games, game systems, and records down in Woodbridge, Virginia, and I was down there helping him out, setting up the shop before the grand opening, and he tossed me this PSP as a way of saying thanks for helping out. And yeah, it's in great condition. Oh, I think it's property of Nintendo now for some reason. But yeah, it's got a new battery. This is a Japanese import, and I really don't know anything about them. I've never used a PSP before. So let me know in the comments what these are good for. Are they easily jailbroken? Can they run homebrew software? I know they have a movie disc format, UMD I think it's called, but I've never really used one. So yeah, I guess I will have to spend some time figuring out what you can do with a PSP. But yeah, thanks very much, Jason. And everyone check out Panay Collectibles if you're in the Virginia, DC, Maryland area. All right, next up we have not a donation per se, but an interesting mystery. Now, you've all seen on the internet where someone posts a message showing that they found a game system and 100 games up in their attic and they have no idea where it came from. And you know, most of those are BS. They're their childhood system and they're just making a big deal about it. But this one is a legit attic find mystery. This machine was found in my parents' attic in its original box, and it's not the system we grew up with. We did have our first computer in the household was a beige cost-reduced TI-99 4A. Not this system. Now, for those of you who are younger, keep in mind, these were the days where you either had 0 or maybe, if you're lucky, 1 home computer in your household. That was it. It was very unusual to have 2 computers in the household. If we had known there was a second TI in the household, it would have been a huge deal. But for some reason, we have this machine that was in the attic and nobody knows where it came from. There's an indication that someone cashed in the $100 rebate because the UPC code here is missing. But other than that, there's no indication of where this came from, who bought it, or anything like that. Now, what's even more interesting is if we open it up here, what we find is that this machine looks like it's never been opened or used. It looks completely new in its original packaging, and there's no indication it has ever been opened or powered up. There's not a scratch on the stainless steel finish. Normally these things are scratched to heck, but this thing is in perfect brand new condition. Nobody in the family has any recollection of ever buying this or putting it in the attic or even knowing that it was there until they were recently cleaning it out. So it really is truly an attic mystery. Okay, finally, we have a bunch of stuff that was donated to the channel by Tom. Now, this stuff came from Tom's dad, who used to work in IT way back in the day, and he's been cleaning up his attic or his garage, and he found a bunch of old stuff, and so it made its way to Tom and made its way to me. So let's take a look at what we've got here. All right, first up, we have a copy of IBM DOS 5.0, aka PC DOS. And what's neat about this is it's still sealed in its original shrink wrap. It looks to be brand new and unused, which is a cool little artifact to add to the collection. Now, the history behind this is that PC DOS is really the same as MS-DOS, at least up to version 6.1. So the reason being is that IBM wanted to outsource the production of the software to another company so they wouldn't open themselves up to lawsuits by other companies claiming that they stole their code. And so Microsoft developed the PC DOS and sold it contemporaneously as MS-DOS. So they're the same thing, but this is just the IBM version and it's still sealed. So very cool. Glad to have that added to the collection. All right, next up from the pile, we have a box that's labeled 360K half-height floppy drive. And on this side, we can see a Tandon sticker, Tandon Computer Products, 360K half-height internal floppy disk drive subsystem. So let's take a look at what's inside this box. All right, looks like it opens from both sides. Neat. All right, here we've got a styrofoam spacer with a blanking plate for a black drive slot and some drive rails in original packaging. And we've got a gray, or rather beige, drive face with LED. And then we have the drive itself. It looks like it's wrapped in its original packaging. It looks very clean, it looks new. It still has the transit card and a black faceplate installed. There's a little bit of oxidation here on the flywheel. I don't know if that's just from sitting or if it's actually ever been used. There's really no indication that this system has ever really been used. Let me zoom in real quick here. you can see there's a little oxidation on the pins here, on the slot, but it doesn't look like it's been installed in anything. I think this is brand new. I think this is a brand new kind of spare drive that you would find in a PCXT or maybe a Tandy 1000. Yeah, pretty cool. Oh, and we've got the manual. Actually, I think there's two. Yeah, there's two manuals. This one here is for the installation procedure for IBM PC-AT, and then this one here is the installation procedure for the PC-XT. And so there would be, yeah, just different pictures for, you know, the different models of machines that you'd be installing it into. But yeah, this looks to be very original. The paper is kind of, you know, it has that very old, kind of crinkly, off-white to it that it's been sitting in storage for a long time. But yeah, I do believe this is all original and brand new. Very cool. Last but not least, we have a box here from Compaq, but here we have a piece of tape that says IBM Model M, and if we open it up, indeed, inside we do find an IBM Model M keyboard. Let's just put that there, like so. And it's got a external, or detachable cable rather, and the cable has a PS2 connector on the PC side and a kind of proprietary connector on the keyboard side, so that's cool. And the Model M itself, let's just zoom in a little bit there. Yeah, it's kind of dirty. I mean, it's been well used, but these things will clean up just fine. These things are built like tanks, so. Oh yeah, so nice, so nice. Yeah, a little dirty, actually a lot dirty, and it's missing a key here, but that's not a big deal. You can still buy these things new, and there's plenty of replacements on eBay and other vendors online. So yeah, I'll clean it up real nice and get a replacement key, and this will pair really nicely with the IBM PS1 machine that was donated to the channel by my cousin Erik a long time ago. It didn't come with its original keyboard because the IBM PS1 keyboard is kind of a plastic piece of junk, and it was broken a long time ago, but this will pair really nicely because the IBM PS1 has a PS2 style keyboard, and this will be a nice little upgrade for that machine. So, thank you very much, Tom and Tom's dad, for the donation of the PC-DOS 5.0, the Tandon 360K disk drive, and the IBM Model M keyboard. Much appreciated. Before we wrap this up, I just wanted to show you a few of the items that I've picked up recently that I thought were particularly good deals. Now, we all know the price of retro stuff has just gone up and up and up on eBay in the last couple years. Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist too. It's getting harder and harder to find a good deal. The point I want to illustrate is that there are still good deals to be found out there if you're patient and persistent. So let's take a look at a few of these items, I'll explain where I got them from, and then we'll call it a day. All right, the first thing I want to look at is this Apple IIc, which you've already seen on the channel. It made a brief appearance in the Kung Fu Master episode not that long ago. And I purchased this machine with the power supply, monochrome Apple monitor, and an external disk drive for $100 at VCF East 2023 this year. Now that is a really great deal. If you were to find something like this on eBay, it might be $300 or $400 for the set. And it's a fully working system. I've already tested it. You've seen it work. Their only problems with it are it's a little bit yellowed, and it's missing an H key, but it does have that lovely Alps keyboard, which is what I grew up using, and I just love the feel of this keyboard, and it fully works. The only other problem with it is that it smells like perfume. The entire machine made my car smell like perfume, it made my garage smell like perfume, so it needs a deep, deep clean. But this was a tremendously good deal found at VCF, and there are VCF events on every corner of the United States. So if you're in the US and you have the opportunity, I would highly recommend checking out a VCF event. Maybe you'll find yourself a good deal like this Apple IIc. Next up, we have this Commodore Plus 4 in its original box, which I found on Facebook Marketplace locally for an asking price of $45. Now, you can find these things on eBay all day long for about $100 in their original box, so I thought for 45 bucks it was a good deal. Now, the seller claims that this machine was never used, but if we pop open the power supply here, all these cables aren't tied, they're not in their original packaging, so I don't believe that for a minute. I believe this machine was used, even if it was only used a little bit, but it was not common for these machines to be used because People either thought they would be Commodore 64 compatible and they weren't, or they bought them for cheap when they were being liquidated on like the home shopping channel and they never knew what to do with them. So maybe the owner never really used it, but they did hook it up just to see. Anyway, I've plugged it in, it all works fine. So it's a great little machine for $45. And I've been meaning to make a video about the Commodore TED series at some point. It is an interesting story. I've read the recent book by Bill Hurd that describes the development process of these machines. So they are interesting in their own right, even though they're not Commodore 64 compatible. So someday I'll do a video about that. But anyway, $45 for a working boxed Commodore Plus 4, a pretty good deal. All right, here's a fun story for you. When I saw the ad for the Plus 4, I wondered, does the seller have anything else that I might be interested in? And I'm glad I asked, because they did have another ad for Old Computer. And there was no picture, there was no indication of what it was, but I did inquire, and Old Computer turned out to be a Commodore 64. It was complete with its manuals and this 1351 mouse, but it doesn't come with a power supply. No problem, not a big deal. And the machine is a little bit dusty, but otherwise fully intact and not really any damage. So not a bad machine. And would you like to guess how much I paid for this? You're not gonna believe it. I paid $40 for this complete system. And you can't even buy a Commodore 1351 mouse these days for $40. So that was a great, great deal. Hooked it up, tested out, everything works. Well, everything but the SID. The SID is a little bit quiet, but otherwise it's a fully functional Commodore 64 with a mouse for less than the price of just a mouse by itself. So the moral of the story is, it never hurts to ask, and be on the lookout for badly worded ads with no pictures. You might strike gold. All right, I think that's gonna do it for today. I wanted to say a huge thanks to everybody who donated items to the channel. I also want to thank my Patreon supporters and channel members. It really is you guys who make all of this possible. I hope you enjoyed this bit. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Retro Bits.